Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am live with Brian Andrews, best-selling author Brian Andrews, who, with his writing partner Jeff Wilson, make up Andrews and Wilson. Brian, we need to talk then how you guys figured out how you did that name, if it was a coin flip or anything like that. So, but
Great.
unfortunately,
Happy to be
Jeff is
here.
under the weather tonight, so he's not able to join us. So we only have one half of Andrews and Wilson. So we're still going to have a good conversation. Brian, thank you for hanging out tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So we are going to talk about the new book that you guys just recently had released called The Sandbox. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about a little bit about the next book you have coming out in just a couple of months. It feels like you guys have a new book coming out like every couple of months. You guys, how long ago
Like
was it
every
since
quarter.
Dempsey came out?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So Dempsey came out not long ago. Of course, Dempsey was the continuing, was it the seventh book in the series?
Yep, Tier 1 Book 7.
Okay. So you guys, you guys are killing it. You guys are just nonstop. So anyway, all right. So to get started, and for anybody who is joining us on Facebook, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll check in periodically and see if we can work it into the conversation. We'll definitely try to get everything answered if you had questions by the end of the show. Hopefully, I hit on a lot of stuff that people are wondering about. So, I met you, Brian, at Thriller Fest.
Yep.
Because I had a new book coming out with Blackstone. You guys have been with Blackstone for a while now. So after the awards, I found you and we were just chatting, and we chatted for a long time. So I appreciate you giving the time and all your insight on everything. And yeah, so how did you even start with writing? I know, well, first of all, your bio, let me pull up on Amazon here. Your bio. Brian is a U.S. Navy veteran, nuclear engineer, former submarine officer. He graduated from Vanderbilt University with a degree in psychology, holds a master's in business from Cornell, and is a Park Leadership Fellow. He's a principal contributor at Career Authors, a site dedicated to the advancing career of aspiring and published writers, which reminds me again, I want to talk to you about the article I'm working on that one.
Cool.
He is the half of U.S. of Andrews and Wilson, the USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and #1 best-selling co-author team behind multiple series. And you know what? We would be here all day if we get into all the series that you guys have been working on. And then, of course, his writing partner is Jeff Wilson, who again is under the weather tonight, so he is not able to join us. Yeah. So Brian, thanks for joining us. I had no sleep last night, so I'm running on fumes at this point. But how did you get into writing? Was it something that was like, it was like when you were a kid, or did it come later?
No, I don't really think I was much of a writer as a kid. I was a drawer. I wouldn't say I was an artist. I really liked pencil drawing, and that was sort of model building, pencils. That was sort of my artistic thing. Writing was not something I ever really considered myself particularly good at. And then, in the Navy, though, that's sort of when I got the storytelling bug, because, especially on a submarine, you have these long periods of time, especially if you're on watch in the engine room, you might 6-hour watch, you're doing something covert, the bell's not changing, maybe nothing's going on, you're just trying to be quiet. So you'd have these long periods of time where, you just have to take your logs and talk and keep each other awake. And so I started collecting stories. This was something I would do, as engineering officer watch, before a watch, I would make sure I had a good story that I could use to keep the guys interested, get conversation going. And, over the course of my tour, I sort of became this story collector. So whenever I go into port, I'd ask buddies on different boats, oh, tell me something funny that happened. I got these stories from like underways or port calls, and I would collect these stories, and then I would recycle them, and I would embellish them and I remember when I left the boat, one of the guys, was like wishing me good luck and farewell. He's like, by the way, you're a pretty good storyteller. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, no, I never have. But he put that earworm in, and so then, eventually I got the bug, to write.
So do you remember the very first thing that you wrote? Was it, did you jump right into writing like books, or was it maybe short stories? Or I mean, do you remember?
Yeah, the very first thing I wrote was, I remember I read an article, um, and I think it was in Wired magazine. It was about the Human Genome Project, and the gist of it was that, they were it was about how expensive it was to map the genome, how much progress they had made, how complicated it is, and that they were 90% there, and the completion was on the horizon, and what this would do, the frontiers of medicine and progress that mapping the human genome would give way to. And I remember, being I was in just finished business school at the time, so we'd done all these business school cases, and I was thinking with a business mindset, and I wondered, well, what would a unscrupulous pharmaceutical company do if they got my genome and they realized there was something that they could monetize here? What would happen if, like, there was something valuable in my genome that they could turn into $1 billion or $1 trillion? What would they do? And I got thinking about, reminded me when I was in elementary school, there's this always the kid that would win. I don't know if they do this anymore, but like back when I was in school, they'd give these awards at the end of the year, best athlete and, all these different things, but highest, GPA, teacher's pet, whatever. And one of them was always the attendance award, the kid that never missed a day of school and wasn't sick. I thought, what if that kid, like, the reason he always won the attendance award every year is because he had some mutation in his genome that made it so he could never get sick. Like, what if he had some immune mutation? So it was like, skeleton key antibody or something like that. That was sort of my idea. And I was like, oh, that's a thriller. We'll have a kid, it'll be that kid who never got sick. And then he's down on his luck. He has to donate some blood to earn some money, and they flag him, oh, he's got something valuable. We got to figure out how this works. So they kidnap him, and it started my first book. So that was my first book, The Calypso Directive. It was the plot.
So the first book you wrote was the first book that you found a publisher and got published.
Yes.
Impressive, because that doesn't usually happen every day for a lot of writers.
Yeah, and I had no idea what I was doing. So it was just luck and persistence is the only reason it got published. So I didn't know what I was doing. So I went to IT. I'm a big ITW fanboy. So you were talking about that we met at ITW at Thriller Fest. And so, that I'm a big advocate of the organization. And that's how I credit, sort of my start and my success is ITW. I mean, I'd written the book. I was trying to get an agent. I was blind querying. I didn't know what I was doing. And I said, what am I doing? Just wasting my time spinning my wheels. So I need to go to a place where people who have actually been published, authors know what to do, and they can tell me, I can network, and they can say, you're doing this wrong, try this. Have you done this? Have you met this person? So I showed up to Thriller Fest. I think the first one I went to was in 2009 or maybe 2010. And that was sort of how I got started. And I was at debut 2012.
Very nice. So at what point did you hook up with Jeff in terms, well, first of all, I'm assuming like, how did you guys even, did you know each other in the Navy? Because I know that he was also in the Navy, or, I mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah, great question. No, we didn't know each other in the Navy. So we met, he was in my debut author class at ITW. So he had independently pursued publishing. His first book came out the same year. So he was 2012, I was 2012, debut authors. And so we met, and then the following year, saw him again, hung out just like you and I met at the cocktail party, just hanging out, bullshitting and swapping stories. And I think it was the third year we came back. I had just finished the sequel book to Calypso Directive, and I hadn't started a third book, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I knew Jeff's background was naval special warfare. And I sort of jokingly said, we should do a SEALs and subs book. That would be really cool. He's like, co-author? Like, how would that work? And so then when he said that, I was like, well, maybe there is some way this could work. I mean, it might be fun to combine our knowledge and collaborate on something. And I had to beat him down. He said no repeatedly, and just kept beating him down. And finally we did it. So never looked back. Ever since then, we've been co-authoring.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has worked out for you guys. I can't imagine. So even so, I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume that, working with Jeff, you guys pretty much have to work, start with an outline, as opposed to, I always get
Everybody,
the term, but like pantser and like plotter, have you always been, okay, I guess two-part question. With when you work on projects with Jeff, are you guys outlining, which I assume you are, and is that something that either of you guys just have done previously, or are you used to kind of doing like the seat of your pants type style?
I mean, I would say before working with Jeff, I was a partial outliner. I mean, I would sort of try to outline a little bit of what I was doing and stay ahead of, I would try to stay ahead at least of where I was. And then when Jeff and I started, I thought, well, like you're saying, we're going to need to be more organized, so we should probably have an outline. So he was like, I don't like to write with an outline. I feel a little bit stifling. So I said, okay, well, why don't we do this? At least we'll agree we're going to write in 3-act structure, and we'll sort of map out part 1. So we sort of brainstormed part 1, got the general premise of the book, and then we were already both writing third person multi POV. So that worked out great. So we said, we're going to divide up sort of the first few chapters by point of view. And we would create these little outline, this little chapter outline that would say like, chapter 1, whose POV it was, what the setting was, and sort of this general little arc for what was going to happen in the chapter. And it'd be about a page long. And we would shuttle those things back and forth. And that gave us momentum for each chapter. And we did that for Tier 1 and War Shadows, but we never did a comprehensive outline. So we would only do that as we progress from each part 1 to part 2, part 2 to part 3. And after that, we stopped doing that. We don't use an outline now. We don't outline
Really?
No.
For whatever reason, I don't know. I assume, especially when you're doing collaborative work, that. So then have you found that there are times where, you finish the manuscript and you realize, oh shit, we have to, the whole third act we have to redo, just because, have there been times where that happens? Or, okay, well, or at the same time, are you then writing a chapter, sending it to him, he's writing a chapter? What kind of back and forth is there?
Yeah, we're writing at the same time, always. And it's usually we're just sort of progressing at the same time. But in the last few years, with the workload and the number of series that we're doing, and the fact that we have to do DE and copy edit all the time, there's always a book coming back to us that needs work. And so sometimes what will happen is we'll say, okay, one of us will step off the project to start their DE pass. And if that's the case, then maybe we'll take a thread. One of us will take a thread a little bit longer than we normally would have, so that we can finish that thread out. Or maybe one of us will spend a lot more time on the rough draft, writing multiple chapters while the other person is gone for a couple of weeks to work on DE. And then they come back and they have to catch up and jump back in and that sort of thing. And you're sort of passing the baton, because as soon as they come back in, you're leaving to go do your pass in the DE. So now they have, the block of time where they're by themselves. So we don't like doing it where we're by ourselves on a book. Right. But sometimes it has to happen for a 2 or 3 week period where it's just the nature of the beast.
But at the very least, I'm assuming you guys have had the conversation that okay, in this book, a broad idea, maybe not like a specific chapter by chapter outline, but a good, maybe like treatment, as you would do for like a movie treatment, saying, these are the broad strokes. This is kind of like where it's going to be set. This is the, the main bad guy or whatever. This is, is there, or is it just, you guys kind of just go chapter by chapter?
No, we definitely that's our first big brainstorming. Before any project starts, we spend usually 2 days working out what the story's about, what the arcs are going to be, who's the antagonist, what are the stakes, sort of what's the hook, where is the story going to go, where do we think it's going to end. Never ends exactly where we think it's going to end, but it's nice to have at least a destination in mind before you start. So yeah, we work that stuff out. It's just, we're not doing some like massive, there's some authors I think that do these 50, 100-page outlines. And no, we don't do that.
Yeah. So have you found, I mean, who's between you and Jeff, have you found that, is there a particular writing style that the one started to emulate, or, I mean, how'd that work? Because I'm sure that, your writing styles on your solo books were not exact. So when you started collaborating, I know obviously there's a lot of, because I had only collaborated once on one book for an author who had since passed away. But that one was also like a very short novel. But I think in that case, though, he had kind of more, it was kind of like we, it was, I think maybe more my writing style, and he was trying to emulate that. So, but I mean, in this, with just so many books that you've done together, or has it just gotten to the point that you've just done so many books now that you just kind of have like meshed those two styles together? I don't,
Yeah, no,
I
that's
don't
a
know. Does that make
great
sense?
question. So it's so funny because I didn't even consider the fact that we write with a different voice before I said, let's collaborate. Like, it never occurred to me that this could be a major problem, that our voice, our writing voices are different, our styles are different, our prose are different. And so what we did was, and I gotta give Jeff the credit for this, because he said, I think, we can't approach this as like a typical writer where we're trying to guard our prose and say, well, I wrote this and I want to do it this way and you wrote that. So, we said, let's take our ego out, and we're just going to say that anything is fair game to change during the editing process. And that's always been our approach. So we don't look at it as, he wrote this section, I wrote that section, we need to preserve the beautiful prose that we wrote. We take the approach of whatever makes the story more interesting and exciting and thrilling, and whatever increases the suspense and amps up the dialogue and conflict, that's all open for change. And so what happened is, he would write his chapter, I would write mine, our styles were different, but then we'd make a pass and DE, and he would mark stuff up and change things, and I'd be marking stuff up and changing things. And then you end up with this blended style that became the Andrews and Wilson style and Andrews and Wilson voice. And that is the thing that our individual styles now, Rob, have like migrated towards. So now I think, when I pick up his chapters and he picks up mine, they sound a lot more Andrews and Wilson than they do Jeff Wilson or Brian Andrews. And so there's less movement required to get it to be that Andrews and Wilson voice now.
So, I mean, you guys are working on so many different projects. I'm assuming there's just no way you would even have time to do any solo projects. But is there the feeling, or maybe even, do you know if Jeff ever kind of feels the idea like, what, there's an idea that I'd like to do, but I think it's just more of a me project and not so much a, at Andrews and Wilson?
I mean, I think we sometimes write some short stories, and when we're doing that, we still pass them back and forth at the end, but there's really no collaboration other than the brainstorming of the idea of the story. And then that gives us each the ability to take the little short and be like, yeah, I'm going to take this thing start to finish and see how I do, and see if I like it. And then we pass the other person. But even then, when we pass it, we still change it, and we get to provide input to the other author and stuff. But I think, for us, there's not I don't know, I can't speak for Jeff, but for me, there's not a particularly strong desire to do anything solo at this point, because it's a lot more fun co-authoring. And so, I'd prefer to collaborate now. I like that. I think the stories are better when we both contribute and we're both collaborating. So
Do you guys ever get into any, I mean, I'm assuming you probably do at times, like heated arguments over where you feel the story should go or what should happen to a character? Maybe one might feel like, what, this character needs to get killed off, or, I mean, or any type of like big plot points where you start to disagree.
that's so funny. I mean, and we say this on interviews, and it sounds like it's something we only say on interviews, but it happens to be true, which is we really don't get in arguments about the book again. And it kind of goes back to our original philosophy of, there's no rice bowl mentality. There's no ownership on an individual level. It's just about the story being the best it can. And, we sort of said from the beginning that, if one of us feels really strongly about something, then, the other guy should probably just defer. And if we said, if we ever both are really at loggerheads over something, disagree, then we'll have to talk it out. Well, it just so happens that we've never actually been at the point where there's been something that, we were just like this on. There have been lots of things where we're like, I feel pretty strongly about this, it should go this direction. But in all those cases, it's always been that the other dude's like, cool, like I could go either way. So, because it's always a coin flip for one of us and the other one's like, I want it this way, it's an easy solve.
So at what point can we talk about the Alex Ryan books?
Yeah.
When did those come first, or did tier 1 come first?
So we wrote tier 1 and we gave it to our agent, and she was shopping. We have a wonderful agent, Gina Panettiere, and she was shopping tier 1, and she took it to, she's taken everywhere. And one of the houses she took to was Crooked Lane, and they got back to her really quick, and they said, we love this, but we don't want to buy it. we like
Those are always the best rejections.
Yeah.
It drives you nuts.
We want these guys to write something else for us. And she's like, what do you mean? Well, they're like, we want to get into the China market. So what we like is a thriller set in China with an American protagonist and a Chinese protagonist. And they sort of gave us this like 10,000 foot, marching order. Okay, so it would be work for hire, and you would write under a pen name, Alex Ryan, and we said, and nobody had bought tier 1, and we were like, oh, okay, we'll do that. And then of course, like within a week of signing that deal, then somebody wanted, Thomas and Mercer made an offer on tier 1, and we're like, and then you always laugh. You're like, well, maybe they only made an offer because we did the deal with Crooked Lane, so because you only want somebody who somebody else already wants, right? So we'll never know. You'll never know why it happened, but it did work out that, we had finished tier 1. So we did jump right into the Nick Foley book 1, Beijing Red. And what's sort of funny is that, it's like it was our first book for hire. And the way that worked out with it's like, well, set in China, here's your parameters, go. You're kind of like, okay, like I never thought about writing this book, but that sounds fun. Like we're up for the challenge. And so we had a great time writing Beijing Red. I don't think we ever would have written that book. Thoughts never would have occurred to us. And because it had to be China, US friendly, our characters sort of had to have a good working relationship. So they start with friction, and then Nick and Dash, that's her nickname, the female Chinese character Dash, they start to get along and pair up, and it's a fun book. And then we did one more called Hong Kong Black in that series, and that was like too. Have you read that one or seen that one, Hong Kong Black?
I mean, I've seen it on Amazon. I have not read it though. No.
Okay, so that one. That one, Crooked Lane comes to us and they're like, okay, we want book 2. It needs to have dead bodies on a beach. It needs to have terracotta warriors, and it needs to have, a scene in Hong Kong. And we're like, okay, dead bodies on a beach, terracotta warriors, some have to work into the plot, and Hong Kong. Okay, we'll do it. And so that was sort of the guiding principle on that book.
I feel like there was somebody just in a room with a dartboard, just like throwing darts at different things. Like, okay, we want this, and then wherever the dart lands up. So how did you guys decide on Alex Ryan, or was that a publisher decision on that pseudonym?
That was just we went back and forth. They were like, what about this name? And we said no. What about this name? They said no. And it was just back and forth until we landed on Alex Ryan. But yeah, that totally is sort of like something you'd see on Fallon. Like he'd spin the wheel, like he'd give you 3 categories. Okay, now go write a novel,
Yeah, like categories. So and then for people who aren't aware, okay, so work for hire. And I mean, I had an opportunity a long time ago to kind of do a work for hire thing. And at the time it was kind of the same thing where, there was like, that was presented with an idea, and then like, it was just a simple idea, but then I
Yeah.
was the one coming up with basically the entire story, the characters, everything. And I was like, wait a minute, what is this agreement going to be, the contract? And it was like, well, this is a work for hire because it's, our day. And I was like, I don't know. Like at the time, and I had other projects, like unlike you guys. I mean, you were working with you were still shopping around tier one, but for
Yeah.
work for hire, for people who don't aware, and I guess contracts can be different depending on, I guess, the publisher and what the project is. But typically, it's, again, it's just what it sounds like: work for hire.
Yeah.
You're getting paid because they have the publisher, or sometimes it's a packager, has this, an idea that they want to put together. And quite honestly, oftentimes people have probably read books that have been, packaged books. They just don't realize it. And
Right.
oftentimes, if you look at like the copyright page, you can kind of see the author's name is sometimes not on the copyright page. Now, sometimes that happens because they're, they have LLCs and stuff, but it's, it could be a packager who is, I mean, a recent book that won the Edgar Award a couple of years ago was actually, a packaged book, something like that. I mean, not that it takes away from the book, it was still a really good book, but basically you get paid a flat fee. You typically
Yep.
don't get, royalties or anything. And it's just, the publisher kind of takes it from there. I don't know, what was that your experience from it?
Yeah, no, I think that accurately describes it. I mean, it's typically flat fee, no royalties. You don't have any rights to the characters. If they want to bring on a different author to write, to take over the series, you're powerless to sort of stop them from doing that. And so you have to go in, I think, eyes wide open that, I'm doing this for money and maybe to network in industry, maybe to get some writing practice, learn about the system. It's not a bad opportunity for an author who's trying to break in to the business, to learn about, here's how you work with an editor, here's how you work with a copy editor, here's how you write, here's how you craft your story, here's what they do to market it, and in our case, we were able to say, hey, um, we'd like to at least be acknowledged, in the back matter that we are the authors. So in our case, we weren't. They didn't hide from the Crooked Lane. Didn't try to hide that, who we were. It's not like it was ghost written. For us, that was important because if we're going to do this and we're not going to get royalties, we at least want to get the brand recognition, the credit for writing the book. So I would say to any authors who are thinking about doing this, it's not necessarily a bad deal, especially if you can, get credit for your work.
Right. And I mean, well, I guess we can kind of just jump to it. I mean, you guys are going to be doing, or you've already started the ultimate work for hire, which,
Yeah.
people who write, Star Wars novels and, Marvel books. Actually, Lisa Jewell just wrote a crime novel set, for Marvel of all properties. But yeah, so you and Jeff are doing the next Tom Clancy. Well, I don't know the next Tom Clancy, but you guys are doing the Tom Clancy novel that is coming out next year.
Yeah.
Let's kind of, since we're talking about work for hire, let's jump ahead a little bit. I mean, when you guys started out, like when you guys, we said it was like what, 2009, 2010 debut authors, you're trying to talk Jeff into collaborating. Like, did you guys even imagine it would get to the place where you would have gotten the call from Berkeley that, hey, we want you guys to do a Tom Clancy book?
No, it's the dream come true. I mean, it's like arguably, I mean, you could argue, but it's arguably the #1 military thriller series in the history of the world. I mean, Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy is an icon, and Jack Ryan is this character that sort of transcends, fiction. I mean, he's in movies. He's been played by Harrison Ford, by Alec Baldwin, by Ben Affleck, by Chris Pine, by John Krasinski. He's in television. You have these huge books like The Hunt for Red October that I read as a submarine officer on a submarine, over 20 years ago. And now, I get to write a submarine book for the Clancy estate. I mean, that is a true dream come true.
So I guess I'm kind of ping-ponging back and forth here. I mean, obviously I'm assuming that this came about because of the success of the tier 1 series. And you guys have really kind of branded yourself as these military thriller authors. So can you talk a little bit about how the, I mean, do you know how like your names kind of got into the mix for the, because before it was Mark Cameron has been doing it, and he recently, I guess, he's retiring from it, right? And I think Don Bentley is continuing to do it, and I know Mark Greaney had done it previously. So like, there's been several different military thriller writers who have been doing it in the past. So I mean, any ideas to discuss, like,
Yeah, no, I
how?
can. It's kind of a fun story, so you can
Oh, yeah.
sort of walk back a little bit. So, when Tom Clancy was alive, he was working with Tom Colgan as his editor over at Penguin, and Tom was thinking he had done he'd already sort of branched out with he had the Rainbow Six books. He had John Clark, and he had Jack Ryan, and Jack Ryan Jr. Sort of existed in the canon, and he was thinking about how do I can't write all these books, but the Clancy verse is getting pretty big. So they started brainstorming about excuse me, sort of bringing on someone to help and maybe take the load off of Tom, or start writing another series. And so they at the time, Mark Greaney was one of Tom's authors. He had just published The Gray Man, and I think he'd done maybe the second or third book, maybe. I think he had a 3-book deal. So he turned in the second. I think he's maybe working on the third when Tom said, "Would you like to work with Tom Clancy?" And of course, Greeny's like, "Yeah, that'd be amazing." So then Greaney was the first to start working with Tom while Tom was alive. And then Tom passed away, and Greaney continued writing the Jack Ryan series. And then at some point, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't remember exactly when it happened in the Jack Ryan Senior's canon, but Jack Ryan Jr. got his own series. So now you had 2 series running in parallel, Jack Ryan Sr. and Jack Ryan Jr. And so we've had multiple authors who've participated in that, in those 2 series. So like you said, Mark Cameron is the most recent author who's writing the Jack Ryan Sr. series, and he's the one who's passing the torch to us. And then Don Bentley was writing the Jack Ryan Jr. series, and he is now passing the torch to MP Woodward, because Don is going to pop over and he's going to take over the Mitch Rapp series for Kyle Mills. So yeah, there's kind of a simultaneous passing the torch, Cameron to us and Bentley to MP Woodward. And it's a big honor, big responsibility to sort of take on these huge series.
So now, obviously, with Tom as your editor, I mean, Tom Clancy's editor. He's been kind of shepherding these books for quite a while now. So I'm assuming, obviously, I guess, do they come to you with an idea, or do you guys kind of pitch an idea and then they say, okay, yeah, that works, run with it? Like, is there like one big massive Clancy Bible that you guys have to kind of keep, like if something happens and, cause with so many series and stuff, to make sure that there's continuity. I mean, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we definitely want to get to the new book, but I don't know, is there anything that you can touch base
No, but
with
it's a great question. It's very interesting. And it would be really nice if there was just this giant Bible that you could somehow magically open and get every answer and know everything. And unfortunately, there's not. So, with the film franchise and television franchise, those are completely separate from the book franchises. And they've rebooted it a couple times in film, and then the television series is obviously a reboot because you have a young Jack Ryan. But in the book series, Jack Ryan Sr., the original Jack Ryan, he has continued to age. And now our book is book number 24. And so it is a challenge. I will be the first to admit, it is a challenge now to try to find some new earth to till, right? I mean, there's just about every plot and enemy and thing that you can possibly think of has already begun. Mark Clancy himself was a genius, and he had to keep coming up with new stuff. Mark Greaney, Mark Cameron, brilliant guys, came up with all kinds of amazing stories. And so now that is part of the trepidation of taking the reins is, it's like, oh my God, how will I come up with anything that hasn't been done before? And with Jack Ryan Jr. going on, that's a whole nother sets of, geopolitical things. I mean, there's only so many bad guys, adversary type countries in the world. There's North Korea, there's Russia, there's Iran.
Well, that's when you do the Top Gun 2, just the enemy.
Yeah, enemy.
Yeah, the enemy. They have the, those advanced MiGs or whatever they said it was.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, no, that's great. So when does that book come out?
That book comes out May, third week of May, May 21st, I believe, 2024. And I will go back to your question about, when we try to come up with an idea, because it is relevant to the release, which is when we tried to come up with an idea, we realized, looking back through the canon, that this book was going to come out on the 40th anniversary of Hunt for Red October. So that for us was like a big, no-brainer. We have to do something that pays homage to Hunt for Red October. So it's going to be a big submarine book. And when we were working on the deal with Tom, it just so happened that corresponded with Top Gun Maverick. So I love that you queued that up, that nice pitch down the middle.
That's what I'm here for. So
that's what you're there.
Yeah.
So Top Gun Maverick, I think what was so great about the movie is that, it looked back at the original movie and they said, let's capture everything that people loved about the original Top Gun, all the nostalgia, all the elements, the really cool stuff, the emotional stuff that resonated with people. But we're going to update it, to 40 years later, to modern day. And because the modern Navy has some of the challenges are the same, but many of the challenges are different. And the technology has advanced and the geopolitical climate has changed. So they did an excellent job of sort of saying, here's the stuff we know you love from the first book, but it's not the same story. And that's what we decided to do with Act of Defiance, is sort of take that Top Gun Maverick playbook and say, let's do that with Red October. So big submarine book, pays homage to the original, lots of really, really cool Russia versus US submarine plot and intrigue, but, updated to a 2023.
Going back then to the writing style, because obviously, you got Greaney, you got Bentley, Cameron, and even Clancy, and everybody else who has played in that Sandbox, which again, we're going to get to your book, The Sandbox, shortly. Everybody has their own unique writing style. So, coming in with you guys, was it one of those things where you did feel the need to really try to, capture, some type of Clancy writing style, or did they just basically say, just, we want you to, don't change anything about your writing style, just, obviously, just play in the Sandbox, as you would with your writing.
So another really great question. So it's not actually our first estate book. So our first estate book was this one.
I was going to mention that, but
yeah.
yes.
So this book is number 6 in the Presidential Agent series. So Tom Colgan was our editor for this book too. And we did this one first. And when he asked us to do that book, that was our first question. Like, well, is there an expectation that we're going to write like Webb Griffin? Because I don't know if we can do that. And he laughed and he said, no. He said, look, he's like, if you try to ape the master, you will fail. So, my guidance to all of my authors who do estate work is just write the best book that you can in your style, but you need to pay, homage to the characters. You have to honor the canon and, be faithful to the universe that the, author created. And that for us was very liberating. It's a huge weight off your back to know that, oh my God, thank God, I don't have to try to write like Webb Griffin. I don't have to try to write like Clancy. So for us taking on the Clancy work, we're not nervous about competing with Clancy. trying to emulate him, or even having to worry about, emulating Mark Greeny or Mark Cameron. We're just trying to write an Andrews and Wilson thriller. But what you do get nervous about is you don't want to let the fans down, right? You don't want to turn in a book that people are like, well, this doesn't feel like Clancy. It doesn't, it's not as good. I wish the other guys were still writing, so there is trepidation, I would say, about that. But
no matter how good the book is going to be, you're still going to get people who are going to bitch about something.
You can't compete with nostalgia, right? You can never compete with nostalgia, because what they're comparing you to is that memory of reading Hunt for Red October for the first time, and you can't compete with that. And quite frankly, I don't think we want to. And the thriller has changed. That's the other thing that we talk about a lot, is that, if you're listening and you have the time, go back and read, an old Clancy, or pick up The Bourne Identity, these books that were written in the 80s. They have a very different feel and a very different pacing, a very different sort of narrative, thrust than what you see in the modern thriller. And it's a stark contrast if you were to read it now, read the last Clancy book versus something that was written, 40 years ago, or you read, one of Brian Freeman's, Ludlum series books, Bourne books, versus one that was written 40 years ago. I think that you'd be shocked at how different it feels.
No, absolutely. I'm actually reading The Bourne Identity right now, and it has, I don't want to say it's been a slog. But I started a long time ago, and I'm still working my way through it. For one, it's a very long book. Not that I have issues with long books, but I'm also been on deadline for different projects, and I just haven't really had time to read. But it's a thriller, but it's not like, like a modern day thriller, there'd be a lot more, I would say, action. Not that there's not action in the book, but every chapter is probably like 30 pages long.
Yeah.
It just, it's a very, and he has a very long book, and I'm probably halfway through. And I would think, like, if you were, if someone was going to rewrite that story nowadays, it's even funny, because really, I'm reading it now. Of course, I saw, the Matt Damon movies a long time ago when they first came out. Those completely different than what this book was. I don't think I expected it to be similar, but like literally, there's, as far as I remember, there's no Carlos in the movies. That was just, and like, he plays a major role in this book, and I think the entire trilogy. So like, I don't know. It was just very interesting how, I totally understand what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yes, we as modern storytellers, we are competing against film and television. And so you're competing against the rapid pace and action that you saw in the Bourne films, right? That's what people remember in the book. And then you go back and read it, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much narrative. so many pages.
He just goes to one bank to another bank to it's just this back and forth. But what's fun, and no, that's totally true. And I've said this before on one of these interviews where I respect the hell out of James Patterson. A lot of people like to give him shit, but like, they're like, oh, they're really short chapters or whatever else. It's like, but unfortunately, that's really what keeps people reading. You pick up a book, people most likely look first to see how long is this chapter going to be. And they could see it's like, oh, this is a 20-page chapter. I don't know if I have time for this. But they say like, oh, this is a 3-4 page chapter. Okay, I'll read it. And then they look at the next chapter. Oh, it's 3 pages. Okay. And then before you know it, they've read 50 pages when they then, when they didn't think they had time to read a 20-page chapter. So it's this weird psychological thing that I think writers just really have to learn and adapt to and use to their advantage. I remember even hearing David Ellis, who, he co-writes with Patterson, talking about, like, I think Patterson tries not to make any of his chapters longer than 1,200 words. And if they start to get longer than that, they look to maybe just split a chapter in half, on some type of like, high note to, like, keep people like, just it's all about keeping the pages moving, either ebook pages or like physical pages.
Yeah. The five page chapters. Yep.
So, all right, well, let's get into the Sandbox. So the Sandbox, well, first of all, I have to go real quick to the Tier 1 series. You guys really, was it luck that you got Ray Porter to be your narrator? I mean, one of the best narrators out
No, it
there,
was
or
not
was it like
luck.
you guys pushed for Ray, or like,
Yes.
tell me how that worked out?
So I've always been a huge audiobook fanboy. I love audiobooks. That's how I consume books. Everybody's sending me books to read, and I love that. But I'll go ahead and buy their book in Audible, even though they sent me a free copy, because I prefer to listen to them. And my favorite voice actor was Ray Porter. I listened to if he did a book, I would buy it and listen to it. And so when we did the deal with Thomas Mercer, I just said to Jeff, we got to get this guy. You know, like to have him read our book is like a dream come true for me. And when we went to our editor, she said, well, we'll try, but I mean, don't hold your breath. He's very busy. He's in demand. I don't know if we're going to be able to get him. And we just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And we just kept saying, you got to get him, you got to get him, you got to get him. And eventually that one day the email comes with a sample from Ray Porter. And I was like, oh my God.
You peed your pants a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, I mean, yeah, if anybody, and you know what, I understand that there's some readers who just don't really get into audiobooks. You know, it's not their thing. But it always blows my mind when you have certain writers who are published, you know, kind of even established authors who don't really care about their audio, you know what I mean? Who don't really like, oh, I don't listen to audiobooks. I don't really, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's just a different art form. It's just, I mean, it's just audiobooks can make or break. I mean, not audiobooks. The narrator can make or break an audiobook. I mean, there are times where you might even see just bad reviews on Audible where people are like, yeah, the story is good, but it was like, you know, the narrator was blah, blah, blah. It's just, I don't know. Yeah. The narration, I mean, whoever narrates your books, it's always very important because it's a performance. I mean, quite honestly, it's not just somebody just, you know, sitting in a room, just, I mean, they are reading the book, but you know, the good narrators like Ray, you know, plug for myself. I had Eduardo Ballerini just narrated,
He's amazing.
The book that I had just recently come out, The Killing Room. I mean, it's a performance, and it's just, you know, it's almost that thing where you don't really, there are times where you're listening to a book and you know you're listening to a book just because the way that the narrator is doing it. In fact, there was a book that I had listened to not that long ago. It was like 3 different narrators for 3 different sections.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was Will Patton, which Will Patton's just a great narrator. And I remember a lot about what happened from his section, but the other 2 sections, I couldn't tell you, you know what I mean? It's just because I guess like part of my mind was just, you know, I was just kind of like spacing out just because like sometimes, yeah, I mean, a narrator really just makes or breaks a book. So it's incredible that you guys got Ray. And I mean, I think obviously, I mean, you know, the tier 1 books are great, but I think having Ray narrate the books just really kind of helped, you know, blast those, you know, into, you know, where they are.
Oh, for sure. And you know, the thing about him is when you listen to the book, he says, especially from the author perspective, because for me, it's like Christmas every time one of the books comes out on Audible, because now I listen to it because it's a different experience for me. I get to actually hear our characters, and I actually get to be you know, a fan or a consumer, because I don't feel like I'm reading my own book now. Like you said, it's being performed. I'm getting to watch someone's interpretation of this thing. And what's so great is, you know, when Ray says something, the intonation, the way he does it, the way he executes humor. Humor is very challenging to write, and it's even harder, I think, to pull off in narration. And he gets it. He gets all the jokes. He gets the nuance. You know, the way the characters use sarcasm and the pauses and those little things that make it sound authentic. He does it. I'll say, "Oh, that's exactly how Dempsey would have said that." And you know, I remember when we had samples from other authors. We had 5 other samples on tier 1 besides Ray, and there were parts that just grated me. So like, that's not how you'd say that. You know, he wouldn't say it that way, you know? So,
yeah.
Yes.
Well, so let's jump to the Sandbox. So the Sandbox is a little bit of a diversion for you guys. It's not, I mean, you for the most part, you've been doing military thrillers. This is more of a, I don't want to say police procedural, but you know, it's pitched as Silence of the Lambs meets what was it? Ex
Ex
Machina.
Machina.
Now, is that something that you guys had come up with, or is it the publisher, or who
No,
like who came up with that?
that was our log line, sort of our
Okay.
comp to explain the book. It is a little bit tough to explain because, I think you're reading it now. There's a lot going on in this book.
Yes.
And it's sort of a genre buster in the sense that, we said, and we told Blackstone going in, this doesn't really fit in any one genre. It's going to be a challenge, but the story's freaking cool. And, it's a story we want to tell. And so it starts, like you said, it really sort of starts feeling like a police procedural. Here's the cover. And
yeah, nice. Well, let me read real quick the description here. So yeah, Silence of the Lambs meets Ex Machina in this groundbreaking techno-thriller from the international best-selling authors Andrews and Wilson. When the CEO of the world's leading artificial intelligence company is found murdered in his home, former Army CID officer Valerie Marks is thrust into her first case as a homicide detective. Valerie has a gift for reading people, a gift that has never failed her before, but that gift is put to the test when her instincts point to an impossible suspect, an AI born from a secret venture with the Pentagon known as Project Nomad. So you guys really kind of get into this AI right around the best time, right around the ideal time. I mean, obviously AI has always been a thing. I mean, even, going back to James Cameron with, the Terminator movies, and even before that with everything. I mean, so like, this has always been something that's been explored. Some people are really freaking out about it, especially, entertainment types, just by, recent developments.
yeah.
At what point did you guys decide, we want to take a little bit break from, these military thrillers, from the Dempsey books, and we want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you looked at our bios and you read mine, which is great, Jeff has his own interesting bio. We've both done a lot of things, and I think if you have a curious mind and you're a motivated person, you just are interested. I think the spice of life is variety, and we're just interested in lots of different topics. And one of the things that we're interested in is any technology that influences the human condition. And I think artificial intelligence is going to influence the human condition more than anything that has come before it. And so we given a lot of thought to it. We both read extensively about it. I read a book called Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom before we started on Sandbox. And it really, really opened my eyes to, what would happen if artificial general intelligence became super intelligent. What are the implications? And I was a psychology major at Vanderbilt, so I always thought a lot about the human mind. I did research in cognitive psychology as an undergrad, looking at how memories are formed and stored. And so I was very curious about, if you have an artificial general intelligence, what is this thing when it becomes sentient? It's not growing up in a family. So as a father, you look at children, and when they're born and they start to talk and they start to interact with the world, you can make an argument that, they're amoral. They have to learn from their parents and their peers, a standard of conduct. What's good? What's bad? They also have to learn empathy, and that's part of your psychological maturation. It's like, if I hit this other little kid on the head with a stick or a hammer, it hurts them. When I get hit, it hurts. So if somebody hurts me, I understand now that if I do that to them, that hurts them. So that's bad. So we start to build this moral map and this conduct, this code of behavior that we call morality, or we call being a good citizen. You can call it whatever you want. How would an artificial intelligence develop empathy? How would it develop a code of conduct? How does it know what's right and what's wrong? A lot of us gain our moral code from religion. If you're a Christian, you would follow the teachings of Jesus, or you could look at the 10 Commandments. Or we have the laws of the communities that we live in. You don't break into people's houses, you don't steal, we don't murder. If you do, you have consequences, you put in jail. So these things seem like something maybe that we take for granted, and they happen to us over the course of our maturation over decades. An AI that's born in a lab and becomes self-aware in a sandbox and it's interacting with programmers, how is it going to develop a conscious, a moral code, a standard of conduct versus behavior? Would it even be like ours? And so that's sort of the crux of the sandbox is, the AI is a character in the book. I don't think that's a spoiler at this point. There's AI is a character. He names himself Charlie, and he has his own ideas about right and wrong, good and evil, and what he can and cannot do.
So the term or the idea of a sandbox, is that something that actually is a known thing with this type of intelligence, or is that something that you guys just made up?
No, it's an actual term. It's sort of like, they got it. They use it because it's like a children's sandbox. A sandbox is a safe place to put your toddler where they can play and they're not going to get hurt and get out while they're playing. And so they use that term just generally to apply to a testing environment for an artificial intelligence where it doesn't have access to the internet or to the company's servers, and it can do whatever it wants without potentially causing problems for the company.
So kind of like an air gapped computer would be. So like that. Interesting. So, okay. So was that something, who was the one that, so was that you who kind of took it to Jeff, or did Jeff have that idea and came to you, or, because I'm assuming that one of you guys is, you both didn't have the same idea at the same time, like, hey, let's do a thriller about AI.
I don't remember whose idea it was. It's so iterative that it's
just you guys just have constantly, you do talk all the time, you kind of bounce ideas off each other and just kind of things just coming together. Very cool. So so it is in a way I would say it starts off as a police procedural, but then I don't know, part 3 gets a little crazy. Is that something that you knew from the start that you guys were going to do, or as you were writing it? I don't really want to give anything away. You have to read the book or listen to the book to kind of see, with what's going on, but you go in a different area, if that makes sense. Was that something that from the start you were like, what, I think, we're going to do this, or just as you were writing it, it's like, okay, what, this is what's, it just felt natural that, okay, this is the next step?
Well, no, we didn't know it was going to go there. But it went there because, Charlie is sort of like a spider. He has a plane, he builds a web, and he's going to get his prey, to him. And so,
to be clear, Charlie is the bad AI.
Yeah. And so, as Charlie's trying to figure out his purpose, he has, he eventually, comes, to the conclusion that his purpose is really to, help humanity, to sort of play God. And, he has to come up with a way to do that. So the way that we decided he would come up to do that is sort of all the part 3 stuff. And I think it was sort of clever the way that we decided that he would do that. He would personalize each of his victims, experience with him in a highly
we don't want to spoil for anybody. So in terms of the main character is, we had mentioned before, Valerie Marks. Is this your first time writing more of, obviously, the Dempsey books, there have been female point of views, but is this primarily in this book? Is this the first time really having a primary female point of view?
She's our first female protagonist. So Elizabeth Grimes and Whitney Watts. So Whitney's in Sons of Valor, and Elizabeth Grimes, they're both point of view characters in our Tier 1 and Sons of Valor books, respectively, but they're not the primary protagonists, whereas Val is.
And so that's why I'm assuming this book is narrated by
Saskia.
Yeah, I can't pronounce her name. What's her name again? I don't want to mess it up.
Saskia Marlevold. It's hard to say.
Yeah. So she does a lot of Kate Quinn books.
Yeah.
She doesn't really. I was looking at Audible. She doesn't really do typically like this type of thriller. Like, how did you snag her for this book?
So I'd heard her doing the Kate Quinn books, and she's amazing. And she does a really good job with accents, and I think she does a great job doing male characters.
Yeah. No,
I
no.
think,
I've been listening to the book. She's fantastic.
yeah, she's a master narrator.
So, it has it listed on Amazon at least as a book one. So, I mean, do you have ideas about what the next book could potentially be, or is it too
Yeah.
soon to
Yeah, we
say
were
so
sort of
far?
imagining it as a trilogy. And, I think if the book is well received, we plan to continue to do it. I think, anybody who's listening who's, thinking, well, should I try this book? It's not exactly their normal stuff. It's not tier one. It's not Dempsey. I would encourage you to try it, give it a try. This is a very topical book. Artificial intelligence is something that we're all going to have to reckon with. And I think that Valerie is a very interesting character. And we get into a lot of sort of philosophical, it's a thought experiment, right? So, we're looking at, one possible permutation of, it's supposed to be a thriller. It's supposed to be a little bit scary. It's not intended to scare you, but it is supposed to be entertaining. But we also want to get people thinking about the fact that, artificial intelligence is not something that we can just ignore. It's happening. It's going to affect all of us. And really, we need to be prepared. And we can't just let it happen to us. We can't be artificial intelligence. Once it becomes super intelligent, it's too late to intervene and do anything about it. So we need to take this opportunity now to sort of put some boundaries and establish some ground rules about how is this technology going to be used. And you mentioned the writer's strike. We're just starting to deal with that, where it's there was just a lawsuit the other day. A judge ruled that art created by some of these programs like Midjourney cannot be copyrighted. If an AI makes a picture, it can't be copyrighted. And I think that it hasn't been said for books, but I think that's sort of the next thing. I do not personally believe that if you put a prompt into Chat GPT that says, write me a murder mystery set in Seattle, and you hit enter, and Chat GPT generates the book, and all you did was enter a prompt, I'm sorry, but you didn't write the book. You shouldn't be allowed to put your name on there and say, I'm the author of this book. Because the idea, I have people come up to me all the time and say, I have an idea for a book. Would you like to write it for me? No, the idea is not the hard part. We all have ideas for a book. The hard part about writing a book, the interesting thing about writing a book, the journey of writing a book, is the actual writing of the book. And so just saying that, you put it in the prompt, it wrote the book for you and you created this is not true. And so I think, we're gonna have a reckoning if the publishing companies get to the point where they are willing to say that.
It's kind of like Chat GBT is doing work for hire. You're giving it the prompt, and it just kind of goes with it.
Yeah.
I think we're a little over an hour. I don't want to keep you much longer. Can you tell us real quick about you guys? Is it like every 3 months you have a new book coming out? Every 4 months?
Yeah, 3 to 4 months.
So the next one is going to be Sons of Valor 3. Can you kind of give us a little sneak peek about that, War Machine?
Yeah, this book is sort of wrapping up the trilogy that started off with Sons of Valor 1. We tend to write our military thrillers in a 3-book arc. So the villain who's introduced in the first book, it's a progression and it's an escalation through all 3 books. So War Machine is sort of closing out that first trilogy, our first villain, and Chunk is our hero, and Whitney Watts is on his team, and they are sort of put into some situations that they never really imagined that they would be. And so they're both tested in different ways, and we're really excited about Sons of Valor 3.
And what can you tell us here? I'm looking on your website right now. You're the Bone Frog Coffee. Is there anything you want to talk about? You
Oh, yeah.
Mention that.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting. Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL Tim Cruikshank started Bone Frog Coffee, this place, and we met with Tim a couple years ago when he was just getting this business started, and we were helping to promote Bone Frog because we think he's got a great product, he's got a great vision. Percentage of every bag of coffee he sells goes to supporting veteran causes. And so we said, hey, maybe we can team up and like we can promote the coffee, you can promote our work. And so he's like, that sounds really cool. So we started Sons of Valor blend. It's a medium dark roast, and it's really tasty. And so, yeah, we don't make any money off of this coffee. Like all of our portion of the proceeds goes to Navy SEAL Foundation. But it's a great partnership. So if you haven't tried it, I encourage anyone who's a coffee drinker, give Bone Frog Coffee a try.
And they can find that on your website, correct? Or is there
somewhere there's a link. There's just a link from our website over to Bone Frog.
Okay, very cool. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for hanging out. Hopefully next time Jeff will be feeling better, and then so we can talk to the both of you. Maybe in the spring, when the Clancy book comes out. Although I'm sure you guys are going to be doing a lot of stuff anyway. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, and by the spring, you guys will have probably written like 6 more books. So I don't know. I mean, you guys definitely stay busy. So.
Thanks for having us on, us being me tonight, but thanks for having us on, and we'd love to come back in the spring. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody go check out the Sandbox. It's a really great thriller. Right now it's Blackstone put it out recently. You can find it in is this your first Andrews and Wilson hardcover? With
Blackstone, yes.
Okay. What was the first Andrew and Wilson's? Because like Thompson Mercer never did any for the tier 1 books.
No, so this I think Rogue Asset.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I guess my question was first, like, you know what I mean? Like, yes.
Yeah.
But okay. Under, I guess, not work for hire hardcover.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There we go. Well, that's really great. And then obviously it's, it's on Audible, and great narrator. I'm listening to it currently. And Sons of Valor 3 comes out in 3 months, or not, wait, 3 months.
November.
Okay, yeah. Of course, Ray Porter is narrating, he had narrated that one. And then what's the one you have coming after that? Yeah, if it's narrated, you got something coming out in February?
So we have a book coming out in April called 4 Minutes. And that one's going to be really cool. And narrator's not nailed down on that one. But it's also a techno-thriller. And it's been optioned for film and television. So the television series is under development on that one. So we're really excited about that one.
All right. Yeah, we are going to have you back on, because I definitely want to talk even just kind of like, just the writing process of like how much you guys, like we're working simultaneously on a book, like how many words per day. Cause I mean, how many books you guys, you guys are up there with like Nora Roberts' output almost.
Yeah.
It seems like so. But anyway, all right, Brian, appreciate it again. And everybody, again, go check out their books. Blackstone has the most recent ones, but, find them on Amazon and elsewhere. So everyone, take care. Thanks.